Welcome to The Thing About Austen, a podcast about Jane Austen's world. I'm Zan.
And I'm Diane. And this episode, we're talking about Grosvenor Street. So we know we talked a few episodes ago about having a virtual get-together for Jane Austen's 250th birthday, but we decided that since December is already packed with so many great Jane Austen events, even more so this year. There's always a lot going on in December for her birthday, but it is jam-packed this year with both virtual and in person, and we're sure people who want to participate are busy with that sort of thing. So instead, to liven up the doldrums of January, we're going to do a little Jane in the New Year get together. So this will take place on Sunday, January 11th, 2026, again, next year at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and that's 8 p.m. Universal Time for any international listeners who want to join. It's going to all be virtual. We're not going to record it or save it. So unfortunately, it's sort of like, if you can show up, great. Zane and I are not much for being on camera, and so...
Yes. It's like a Yeti spotting, to see us on a screen.
Exactly. So there is a sign-up form where you can sign up and you'll get a link to attend. You can find that both on our website, thethingaboutaustin.com. It will also be in the show notes for this episode. So we hope to see some of you there.
Absolutely. We do have one other thing that we wanted to mention. It didn't occur to us while we were recording the Lover's Vows episode, but listening back during the editing, we realized that some people might want some clarification of what Mary Crawford means when she uses the phrase making love. So that phrase did not have the same meanings as it does today. During Austen's time, it was more about making declarations of love, kind of wooing someone. So definitely still a bit forward or provocative for her to be saying this at the time, but not to the degree some of you might have been thinking.
Yeah, just a little clarification on that point. So we haven't gotten any emails about it yet. So that might be something that most of you were already aware of, but just in case, wanted to
clarification.
Just wanted to put that out there.
Yes.
It's one of those things like, there's some things that you just know that it doesn't occur to you, right? And then listening back to it later, you're kind of like, oh yeah, that probably does, that is a bit...
That might hit different for some people.
That might potentially be confusing to some people.
Yes.
And so that's kind of like the whole purpose of this podcast is to...
clarify those things.
Yes, exactly. So we wanted to do that here. Okay, so now for today's topic. We are back in the world of Pride and Prejudice for this episode. At this point in the novel, the Netherfield ball has occurred, and things are looking to be headed in a positive direction for Jane and Bingley. Like, ooh. Bingley's making some tentative plans with a very eager Mrs. Bennet to dine with the Bennets. She's like, oh, you must dine with us. We will not be leaving your house, sir, until you agree to dine with us. And he's like, of course, I would love to. As soon as I get back from this little trip to London, I'm going to be right back.
Yep.
So we think. But then Jane receives a letter from Caroline letting her know that, in fact, the entire Netherfield party has decided to also decamp for London.
Poor Jane.
I know.
So this is from the text. She then read the first sentence aloud, which comprised the information of their having just resolved to follow their brother to town directly, and of their meaning to dine that day in Grosvenor Street, where Mr. Hurst had a house. Like, we will not be back. We're headed to town.
To a fancy part of town.
A very fancy part of town.
So this topic requires that we kind of zoom out a bit, starting with Mayfair as an area in London, then zooming in to Grosvenor Square, before we can then really contextualize Grosvenor Street. So this is like a portmanteau episode, 3 in 1. You're very welcome.
So start, we'll give some basic definitions of each of these areas and then dive into the background. So according to Daniel Poole, in What Jane Austen Ate and Charles Dickens Knew, Mayfair was, quote, the fanciest residential area of London, about a half a mile square in size, bounded by Oxford Street on the north, Bond Street on the east, Piccadilly on the south, and Hyde Park on the west.
This is prime real estate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Within Mayfair, we have Grosvenor Square, which again, according to Poole, was, quote, a part of Mayfair that an 1871 guidebook no doubt truthfully called the most fashionable square in London. Obviously, 1871, later than what we're talking about, but it still holds true.
It's absolutely. And that finally brings us to Grosvenor Street, which Christina Lupton, in the Oxford World's Classics edition of Pride and Prejudice, describes as, quote, a street running from New Bond Street to Grosvenor Square in London's exclusive Mayfair area, just to the east of Hyde Park.
Now, this might paint broad strokes, but to understand why Grosvenor Street carries so much weight in Pride and Prejudice, we need to go back to the very beginning, when the Grosvenor family first acquired the land that would become Mayfair.
According to Lucy Inglis, in her book, George and London, Into the Streets, quote, the fields between Park Lane and Oxford Street came to the Grosvenor family in 1677 through the marriage of their 21-year-old Cheshire Baronet Sir Thomas Grosvenor to 12-year-old Mary Davis, which we need to just pause and say, gross.
Yeah.
That is very gross.
Mary was the heiress of a scrivener, a legal financial professional, and her dowry consisted of the Manor of Ebury, which included the land that would become some of London's most valuable real estate. According to the London Encyclopedia, this consisted of, quote, 100 acres in Mayfair and about 400 acres in what are now Belgravia and Pimlico. The annual rental amounted to £2,170.
Even though Mary and her family were land rich, the estate was in debt. The Grosvenors had money and a title, so this marriage solved both problems. The Grosvenors gained land and consequently more power, and Mary's family gained financial stability. So this laid the foundation for one of Britain's greatest fortunes.
Mary and Thomas had several children, and in 1700, after Thomas's death, their oldest son, Richard, commissioned his family estate surveyor, Thomas Barlow, to prepare to develop the estate in Mayfair into what became Grosvenor Square.
So this area of London was generally underdeveloped at this time and was considered relatively marshy when the original marriage contract was created. In her doctoral dissertation, Elegant Buildings and Pestilential Alleys, Space, Society, and Politics in London's West End, 1735 to 1873, Laurel Flynn also points out that, quote, the fields on the western edge of London chiefly drew their fame through the annual May Fair and the gallows at Tyburn. So super fancy, kind of marshy place, known for this kind of rural fair, and then, executions at Tyburn. So that was the area that they were going to develop.
However, Sir Richard obtained a license to develop Grosvenor Square and the surrounding streets in 1710, and he and Thomas Barlow began to build the square between about 1725 and 1731.
As Historic England explains, quote, Barlow planned an estate based on a grid pattern of spacious streets with a garden at its center. And this wasn't just any garden, since the Grosvenor estate was, quote, amongst the first of the major London estates to establish an extensive garden at the center of its new residential development, and introduced the first example of a London garden square taking on an oval shape. And this would be a design that would inspire squares across the capital.
Grosvenor invested £2,871 on the garden's design, likely created by John Alston. Historic England describes the design as including, quote, a wall and fence boundary, elm edging, turf, mixed and flowering shrubs, plants, and evergreens. The rest was, quote, laid out as a wilderness garden, divided by a geometric pattern of intersecting paths. Because nothing says wilderness like
geometric patterns. Absolutely. And later, the garden would also feature an equestrian statue of George I, which was erected in 1726. And this was apparently the first statue of its kind to be placed within a garden square.
And again, according to Historic England, quote, the geometric plan was maintained until around 1774, when the garden's layout was modified by George Richardson following a resident's petition for a private act of Parliament to alter and enclose the garden.
They actually made it so you had to have keys to get into the center of this.
It's like, if you have watched Notting Hill, you know exactly what's happening here.
Yes, exactly.
Julia Roberts is going to have to climb up over that fence, and she's going to have to flirtatiously taunt Hugh Grant, and then they're both going to tumble into this garden together.
Yeah, and he's going to say whoopsie daisies, and we're all going to laugh. Yeah. So that is the garden, but now let's talk about the buildings at Grosvenor Square. And these were intended to present a very stately, unified appearance. According to Inglis, Colin Campbell was brought in to create a design for the east side, and the builder John Simmons had a respectable stab at creating London's first palace front, a grand terrace of houses which looks like one enormous building. So an example of this would be like the Royal Crescent in Bath, which we've talked about before.
However, according to the London Encyclopedia, quote, despite the stately appearance, which both the individual houses and the whole enormous ensemble were evidently intended to provide, attempts to impose architectural uniformity were largely ineffective. The carpenter, John Simmons, did achieve symmetry on the east side, but Edward Shepherd's attempt to provide a Palladian facade on the larger north side was only realized at 3 houses, and splendid schemes devised by Colin Campbell came to nothing. It's so hard, you have a vision and people just won't get in line.
So true. And so there's a lot of kind of mismatched houses. There's nothing particularly symmetrical or similar about these facades. And one snarky architectural critic named James Ralph wrote in 1734 that number 19 Grosvenor Square was, quote, a wretched attempt at something extraordinary.
Oh, to have been an architectural critic in 1734. Like, what a life. What a life.
Right? What a heyday to be just snarky about buildings.
Mm-hmm. Although that didn't seem to stop people from wanting to live on the square. Inglis points out that even the maligned number 19 address, quote, was soon inhabited by the 7th Earl of Thanet, who parted with £7,500 for it, the equivalent of about £11 million today. So, number 19 obviously had some things going for it.
Right? Maybe the idiosyncrasies were part of the charm, okay? So far, we've talked a bit about the logistics of Grosvenor Square, but now let's focus a bit more on its cultural context. So the houses were set back 30 feet from the streets, which gave this square a really wide open feel.
Grosvenor Square was known for this openness. According to Julie Charleman's article, The Social Geography of Grosvenor Square, Mapping Gender and Politics, 1720 to 1760, one London guidebook noted that, quote, what made the situation delightful was the square's rural qualities. Grosvenor Square proved to be a model of the built urban environment, blended with the positive qualities of the countryside, namely its fine air. The massive dimensions of the square, 530 by 680 feet, contributed to the sensation of openness, whilst at the same time the surrounding townhouses enhanced the insular qualities of the estate development. So, this is more to Mr. Woodhouse's liking, the good quality air.
Yes. Yeah, still feels like you're kind of in the rural spaces. So by the mid-18th century, the square had become a hub for the aristocracy. According to Flynn, quote, of the 277 houses built in Grosvenor Square and surrounding streets, 42.2% of initial tenants belonged to the titled classes. In Grosvenor Square, 68.6% possessed titles, with 2 dukes and 9 earls among the first occupants. Which is actually, that's quite fancy. So these just weren't houses. These were statements about privilege and status.
Yeah, this was like the place to be.
Mm-hmm.
The square was also a popular place for affluent single women to live. Amanda Vickery writes, especially those recently bereaved, though royal mistresses and estranged wives were attracted too. More than half of all ratepayers between 1720 and 1760 were single women. I kind of love that, listen, I'm a rich widow. Where am I going?
Yeah.
I'm going to Grosvenor Square.
Absolutely. Well, and part of the draw was that these women were really enjoying the fact that it was close proximity to fashionable society, family is all around, and then also not too far from shopping. And so Vickery continues with an example. She says that, quote, Lucy, the Dowager Duchess of Rutland, lived alone, but within a 5-minute walk of a married son, a married daughter, a widowed daughter, and a married grandson. She's in close proximity to everything she needs.
Mm-hmm. And all these posh residents drew more posh residents, and the cost of living here grew exponentially over the next 100 years. By the 1820s, all the original 99-year leases granted by Robert Grosvenor began to expire, and the rate grew further from there. According to Lynn, quote, by the early 1820s, rental from the Mayfair estate, quite apart from the enormous sums earned in fines for renewals, was £20,000 per annum. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. So the combination of the social rank of the residents, the open air location, which is also really close to Hyde Park, and the expense of living here, all of this means that, as Flynn puts it, quote, the social prestige of real estate in the square prompted 18th and 19th century novelists to treat the district as synonymous with wealth and social status. So Grosvenor Square isn't just a place to live, it is this symbol of power and privilege. I mean, it's not just a symbol, it's actually what it is, but it's being used in literature very often as just like, you use that address, it's as shorthand for what all of this means.
So let's bring all of this back to Pride and Prejudice. We are to understand that the Hearsts have a house on Grosvenor Street. To remind you, this is a street that extends out from the southern side of Grosvenor Square, running from Hyde Park, which is to the west and is described as Upper Grosvenor Street, and also running to New Bond Street, which is to the east and is called Lower Grosvenor Street.
Grosvenor Street is paralleled on the north side of the square by Brook Street. So these streets are counterparts in a lot of ways, including poshness. I think they're basically like rivals for who's fanciest.
There was a slight distinction that Upper Grosvenor Street was just a bit fancier than Lower. This is likely because Upper was closer to Hyde Park and a bit further from shopping and trade districts. So, just like how much can we sort of gradiate our levels of snobbery,
Yes, absolutely. So we've established then that the Hearsts are in a very fancy part of London. And this becomes a bit more relevant when you realize that when Jane travels to London with the Gardiners, Mrs. Gardiner makes it really clear that Grosvenor Square is almost an entire world away from her address in Gracechurch Street. So she's making it very clear that Jane is not very likely to run into Mr. Bingley if she's coming to London for that.
She says, I hope that no consideration with regard to this young man will influence her. We live in so different a part of town. All our connections are so different. And as you well know, we go out so little that it is very improbable they should meet at all, unless he really comes to see her. Like, they're not going to be casually running into each other.
Yeah. And so for context, we're talking about a distance of nearly 3.5 miles in London, this really congested space.
Right. And there's no tube during this time.
Exactly.
So, like,
exactly.
Again, for a modern audience, like, you're like 3.5 miles. Like, what's the big deal? And obviously we know Lizzie in the countryside will cheerfully walk that across fields. But
sure,
it's different in the city.
Yeah. They're not going to do this jaunt across town at a whim. So this is perhaps why, this distance is perhaps why Lizzie comments that Mr. Bingley is, quote, in Mr. Darcy's custody while he's in London, and that, quote, Mr. Darcy may, perhaps, have heard of such a place as Gracechurch Street, but he would hardly think a month's ablutions enough to cleanse himself from its impurities, were he once to enter it. And depend upon it, Mr. Bingley never stirs without him. So she's being cheeky here.
Of course, this isn't quite an accurate picture of Darcy, but it really does establish a bit of the social and literal distance between these spaces. That's also why it's kind of a big deal when Jane writes to Lizzie that, quote, my aunt is going tomorrow into that part of the town, and I shall take the opportunity of calling in Grosvenor Street. So again, the logistics of they can't just walk, right? This is a carriage ride. It's probable that her aunt maybe has some shopping to do, and so they're going to head over there. But it's not like they don't live in the district where they can just step out their door and be there.
Yeah. So again, this is why it's also kind of rude for Jane's reception from Miss Bingley and Mrs. Hearst to be as cold as it is, because it's very clear that Jane has made a significant effort to see them.
Yeah.
And then later, Caroline doesn't even return the call to Jane for weeks, which is, again, that's just a socially rude thing. But it shows, again, that this space that they are trying to navigate it's a social thing as well as a space thing. And after this exchange of visits, that's when Jane finally is like, oh, yeah, this is not something that we are going to pursue. This relationship is not something that the Bingleys are at least interested in pursuing, that the sisters. And so Jane is our sweet, soft sister who gives all sorts of, bends backwards to think well of people. Yeah. And she realizes that, no, this has been a very revealing exchange.
Yeah. It's also giving us an insight, too, into the status of Mr. and Mrs. Hearst, right? That because we really don't know much about this man other than just some of his culinary preferences.
Yes, his culinary preferences are known, and that's about it.
But that's about it. Like, he's not like a big character in the book. And so much so that in some adaptations, he doesn't exist. So, in some adaptations, Mrs. Hearst doesn't exist either. So. There's not a second sister.
Yeah.
But obviously, like, whether it's from his own money that he had beforehand, combined perhaps with money that Mrs. Hurst brought to the marriage, either way, like, they're...
This address is a big deal, and there's a reason that they've name dropped it.
Yes, exactly. Like, there's a very specific reason why Caroline wants Jane to know, oh, you know, my brother-in-law has a house on Grosvenor Street. Like, we are just around the corner from a bunch of dukes and earls and other fancy people. Yeah.
Well, I'm just realizing, too, this also means that when Jane gets that letter from Caroline, the very first one, where she's like, oh, we're decamping from Netherfield, and then she drops Grosvenor Street into that. It's almost, again, Jane doesn't read it this way, but this is them saying, we are going where you can't follow.
Yeah. We're not in Meryton. We're not in Hertfordshire anymore, right? Like, this is different. It's one thing to sort of like mingle amongst the classes in the countryside.
Yeah, in the country. Yeah. But the fact and that's the first mention really of it too, is in the letter. So you know that that's Caroline overtly dropping the address.
Which again is so funny, because if we're really talking about like the true context of social snobbery during this time.
Oh yeah.
She's so far down. Bingley doesn't own an estate. They don't have a title. Their family's money did come from trade. Like, you know, so there's this kind of like, she's putting down Jane, but I'm sure there's plenty of those fancy people who'd be like, oh.
Like new money.
Yeah, new money, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's these references that Austen has embedded is very, very overt signaling that we are to understand not just the location, but all of the social implications of Caroline throwing that address around.
Yeah. So if you are thinking to yourself, Grosvenor Square, Mayfair, that all sounds familiar. Well, if you have ever read, I don't know, a Regency romance ever, or historical mystery, like anything that is set in London during this time period, it's going to come up a lot. It's going to come up a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
And it is kind of funny, because it is, again, meant to be a shorthand for so much of what's going on in these spaces.
Yeah. Even if you've never been to this area, you just know if you've read enough of these books, you're like, okay, well, you just know where the fancy areas of town are, right? Like, it just comes up so often. So yes, if you were wondering if the Hursts live in a fancy part of town or not, the answer is yes. The answer is emphatically yes. Yes, they do. And if you were also wondering if Caroline wants you to know about that, yes, she does.
We were shocked that she was going to name drop.
Right.
You know, we were all shocked.
Yeah. It's not like here's our address, please call on me. You know, it's like we're to dine there tonight, you know?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We're leaving Netherfield to go to Grosvenor Square. We just need you to know.
Well, if you have any thoughts on Mayfair, Grosvenor Square, Grosvenor Street, especially, you know, if you've been there more recently and have thoughts on like how it is in the modern context, we'd love to hear about that. Send us some pictures. You can find us on our website, thethingaboutaustin.com, and email us at thethingaboutaustin@gmail.com. You can also still find us on Instagram at thethingaboutaustin, but, you know, our website or email is definitely the best place to reach us. And you can check out merch for the podcast on Redbubble. Go to aboutaustin.redbubble.com. And before we go, we also wanted to shout out some 5-star listener reviews. Thank you, as always, to everyone who takes the time to do this. Golda G says that the podcast is required listening for Austen fans. While Dinky says, if you are hungry to know more about the material culture of Jane Austen's novels, this podcast is for you. And M. Gardner, any relation to our Mrs. Gardner, perhaps, says that we're informative and refreshing like a cup of tea. Aww.
I love that.
So thank you to everyone, as always, who has taken the time to do that for us.
Yes. And stay tuned for next episode, when we'll be talking about Miss Lamb with Damien Scott.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.